Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you'll get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD Behind the Blue Wall of Silence. I'm so happy that we got a former NYPD member on this week's episode. Today's guest is a retired New York City police officer who's moved on to the theater. His play, Officer, Confessions of a South Bronx Cop, will be out in April. Al Gonzalez, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic. Wonderful to be here.
Al, please tell our listeners a little something about yourself.
I came on July 86 class. I'm a Jersey boy. I'm from a little town called Leonia, just over the George Washington Bridge. So basically, I could see Manhattan from my bedroom window. Grew up there. I came on to the job a little bit later. I think I was about 26. And because I play the bagpipes, and I have since I'm a teenager, I knew so many police officers because so many guys play the pipes these days. I had been encouraged to take the test, and there was a fellow, he was a transit guy, and I'll always remember him. His name was Mike Lavelle. He took the time to go and mail me an application. I filled it out, and there started almost a 3-year-long process in those days. This was like early 84. It was almost 3 years to get on the job. I remember 50,000 guys and gals took the test on that day. So I went through the process. I was very fortunate. I didn't have any issues on the job. Like I said, July 86, I think our class was about 3,000 people, and we went in 2 shifts at the academy on 20th Street, about 1,500 in each shift.
I want to get into your play first because it's unique for cops from our job to get into anything where they're putting themselves out there. As I know, with a podcast, it's like, as I've always said, it's like pulling teeth to get retired NYPD guys to come on in and talk about their career. You pivoted towards theater. Can you go into that? Tell us about
Sure.
your play.
I have a couple of mentors that encouraged me to write. I've been writing the book, and the play has come out of that. One of my mentors was a fellow named Malachi McCourt. His brother, Frank McCourt, wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Angela's Ashes, and that was Frank McCourt. And then Malachi was his brother. Malachi had done radio shows on WMCA, UOR, I believe. And the other fellow was John McDonough, who's still one of my best friends to this day. The man has been driving a New York City cab 40 years. He had done his own one-man show called Off the Meter, and John and I became very good friends along with Malachi, and they both encouraged me to write, and I was sort of at a deadlock. And one day I said to Malachi, I said, Malachi, I want to become a writer. How do I do it? He goes, how do you do it? He goes, you just start to write. There's
Right.
no test. There's no gatekeepers. That a lot of people, guys like ourselves and people that watch this podcast, we all have a book in us. We all have a show in us. I mean, the stories, we tell amongst ourselves. We don't really come to grips with the fact that a lot of civilians would be fascinated and love to hear these type of things. So this past April, myself and John and a third friend, Brendan Fay, we did a 3-man show called The Cop, a Cabbie, and a Crusader, and we did it all over New York City, and we did it at the Irish Repertory Theater, which is about the top off-Broadway theater that you could do. And I never really saw myself as a playwright or a stage performer. I have played the bagpipes professionally pretty much all my life, so I don't suffer from stage fright. You could just plot me anywhere, and I go ahead and do my job. But out of that experience doing the 3-man play, I had all the genesis necessary to do my own one-man show.
So what years were you active with the New York City Police Department? 86 to?
2006. I did
Right.
exactly 20. My son in '06 was just starting kindergarten. And
Wow.
at that point, I was like, either I'm going to be there and coach him in Little League and see him grow up, or else, just keep either riding in a radio car in the South Bronx, or, I spent time in Intel in the later years in my career before I retired. I never looked back on being there for my child. And I know a lot of guys have to make a tough decision. You get up there at top salary, you're making some OT, and you're weighing this in one hand, and then the other hand, one thing I could tell you is you never get those years back. And if you don't spend them with your children, there probably will come a time when you regret it, when you're laying there in the bed and you can't get to sleep one night and you say, I wonder what it would have been like to go to Little League or to basketball or soccer, all those things, that my father couldn't be at because my dad worked 3 jobs. We never saw him. He'd come home and sleep on the couch for an hour and then be back out to the next job. And he's 95 now, and I know he, thinks back and wishes he could have been there with us more. I have 5 brothers, but we don't hold it against him. He did what he had to do, and gave me a work ethic because of that.
Funny you should say that because when I was a kid, I didn't understand that. And my dad was a butcher, but he worked 6, 7 days a week. And I would say, Dad, you don't come to my little league games, or Dad, you don't go to
Mm.
my football games. He said, Vic, he goes, if you want to do that for your kids, civil service.
That's right.
He
That's
goes,
right.
all those cops and firemen have weekends off and they always
Yeah.
finagle and they work second jobs. But when you got out of the police academy, you wind up in Midtown Manhattan.
To my complete shock. So when I came on the job, other than, a few guys I knew that played the pipes in the Emerald Society Band, the Transit Band, the Housing Band, the Port Authority Band, I knew all these guys socially. Other than that, I didn't have any hooks, and it was one of those things you learned in the academy. They talk about, corruption and they try to hammer it into your head, but they never talk about the soft corruption. And you learn that in the academy because where you get assigned out of the academy has everything to do with hooks, phone calls, rabbis, all those things. Well, that's corruption too, but they don't ever explain it to you that way. And,
Oh,
right away, everybody's jockeying for position. I mean, I didn't have a phone call.
no, me
So
neither.
graduation day at the garden, before we go out and have, Mayor Koch hands us our certificates and shakes our hand. In the back, in the hallways of the garden, they've got a clipboard and they line you up by company, and your academy instructor goes down your name and tells
Yeah.
you your assignment. And here it was, Al Gonzalez, NSU 3. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I was like, that's Midtown South, Midtown North, and the 17th. And that's what other recruits had all said. You'll never get there. Only the sons and daughters of chiefs and politicians, and they were correct, got assigned there. Well, there I was reporting 2 days later to Midtown South and trying to figure out how I wound up getting. I have to say my NSU sergeants learned a lot from them, including how to drink till about 6 o'clock in the morning at a couple of pubs around the corner from the Midtown South. But what's funny? When you work in a place like Midtown South, it is totally different than the South Bronx. The
Oh,
types of
yeah.
calls are totally different. Everything is on the street in Midtown South because in
Right.
those days, there weren't a lot of residences, where in the Bronx, everything is in a project, a tenement, okay, this, let's put it that way. Basically, we were told, you're a potted plant, here's your post, here's your beat. But you soon learn that, let's just say, and I deal with one of the stories in my play deals with this. So I remember one night having my foot post was 8th Avenue, 35th Street to 40th Street, up to the Port Authority. And you'd go like 8th to 10th Avenue. You'd walk it. You pretty much ran your beat the way you wanted it. Once you developed your style of policing, and every foot cop develops their own style. One guy runs it his way, and, across the street is your beat, and you run it the other way. And the characters, on those beats get to know, whose beat it is and what this cop will allow.
Right.
And I used to say to some of the shady guys, look, here's my 5th grade teacher said this, here's a square. And you can do almost anything you want within that square, but step outside that square, then you'll find out, how I deal with you. So there's such a thing as the art of medicine, the art of practicing law. Well, there's an art to policing.
Yeah.
And the Midtown South and issue 3 gave me a good foundation in developing what kind of cop I wanted to be when I was walking.
Yeah, that Midtown area, especially by the Port Authority building, I remember getting flown there a couple times early in my career, pre-Giuliani, foot posts and stuff. And that neighborhood is like the lost and found of shit because everything pops up through that Port Authority building. There's pimps, hoes, pickpockets, scammers, drug
Yeah,
addicts, rip-off artists. And coming from the Bronx, it's a totally, I mean, the Bronx was screwed up too, but Midtown, it was like, it was so transient down there because you grab
right.
people, and this guy's from New Jersey. You grab people in the
Yeah,
Bronx 9 out of 10 times, they're from the Bronx,
yeah, yeah,
screwing around. They
yeah.
don't leave their zone.
That's
Midtown,
it.
it's just like
Yeah,
kind of, it was like a detail for scumbags. They all
yeah,
flew down there and just kind of did their thing.
yeah. I talk about it in my show. I remember coming down to 42nd Street with some high school buddies, and we'd go down there, take the bus and the subway in from Jersey, and we'd go down along 42nd Street to watch some dirty movies and buy some phony ID because,
Fireworks.
we were still like 16.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we did too.
and the drinking age was 18, okay, in those days, and, we'd get the ID, so we could get served back in Jersey, and then we'd see a foot cop, like, looking at us, and we'd get scared shit, like, he figured out what we're up to and the whole thing
Oh,
like
yeah.
this, and then fast forward X amount of years, and then I was that foot cop, I never could have imagined that I would, be walking that beat and being in that guy's shoes. I didn't even think I was, ever gonna be a cop when I was, 16, 17. It just wasn't on my radar.
When you finished up your NSU, then you get a dose of reality because you go from Midtown Manhattan to the 40 precinct, the bombed out South Bronx. What was that like when you first got? Now, when did you get to the 40? What year?
Probably like June-ish, July '87.
Yeah, 40 was rocking and rolling. What was your first impression when you got to the 40?
Well, I said to myself, well, they figured out I didn't have a hook to stay
Yeah,
in
it's up.
Midtown. They must have realized they screwed up. Cops in those days, the department took the easy way out. They just looked at your last name. So if your name was Chang, you're going to Chinatown, the
Down.
5th precinct. If your name is O'Hara, well, you had a good chance of staying in Midtown. Anybody with a Hispanic last name like me, even though, I mean, I got 3 Irish grandparents off the boat and one grandparent who's Spanish. It didn't matter. They just looked at my last name and like, yeah, we got a place for him. He going up to the 40. Yeah, either that or the 44,
Was Spanish
42.
Harlem
Yeah, or maybe even
23,
Spanish
25?
Harlem was a lot better. Even those precincts were a lot better because it was Manhattan and you could transfer out borough
Right,
to borough a lot easier.
easier.
Good luck trying to get out of the 40. I remember they had this crazy career path, they called it. If you
I
got
remember
X
that
amount of
bullshit.
points
Yeah, and a
working in an
bribery
A
collar.
house.
Yeah, and a bribery collar. You'd be driving the police commission, all
Yeah,
that
yeah,
bullshit.
yeah. It was all bullshit. Anyway, so I get up to the 4. I remember my first day, and so got changed into my uniform, standing there, roll call. It was a legitimate roll call in those
Right.
days. And the sergeant's going down the clipboard, and it went something like this: Hernandez, Santos, Gonzalez, 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 Gonzalez. Like 3/4 of the tour was named Gonzalez, and there were like a couple of Irish guys. That was basically it. So I could speak pretty good Spanish, but it's a difference. It's not Puerto Rican
Right.
Spanish because I took years of it in high school and everything like that, and they taught you this Castilian Spanish. It's different. But I could hear the Puerto Rican guys talking about me, right? They're looking at me. In those days, I had like reddish hair and you know what, and
Who the fuck is
they,
this guy?
they're like, "Oye, mira, don't talk to that guy, man. He's from internal affairs." But they must think we're stupid. Like they sent an Irish guy here
And you were
to the
older. And you were older,
yeah,
so you were an older rookie, so they would have
yeah.
thought maybe you came rolled right out of IB.
Yeah, they're like, tú sabes, watch out for that guy. Don't say nothing to him, right?
Uh-huh.
And then even the Irish guys, they see me coming down, from roll call. They'd like turn and look at me and like turn around like I had a load in my pants. They would avoid me too. So it took me a while to find my feet there because, people looking at me, even the sergeant was looking at me funny, like, what's the deal with this guy, but that was just the way you got assigned in those days. I don't think it's like that anymore because I see,
No.
I'm in Midtown. I see a lot of guys, the days of the Irish looking cop, on the beat, it's
That's
gone,
odd, yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
I always equate a rookie in our time, a rookie cop getting out of NSU, going to a precinct, and depending on the size of the precinct, there might be 10 rookies going to a precinct, there might be 30, there might be 50. I
yeah,
always equate it to like guys getting into their first couple of days in prison. No one's really talking to you. Everybody's feeling you out. And what you'll quickly notice as a rookie NYPD cop is the old timers start walking by and you see them squinting and reading your name tag. And
yeah,
they
like,
want to know, does that name ring a bell? But there's a lot of with the ethnicity into it. And the reason
yeah,
that is because every NYPD precinct has a guy, a recruiter from a fraternal organization. So when I got to my first precinct, they figured out I was half Irish, half Italian. I was getting hit for the Columbia Association. I was getting hit for the Emerald Society. And basically, like, yeah, just give us, I mean, back then, just give us $20 and we'll give you a card. And
right.
I wasn't going to go to those meetings. I'm paying for someone else's 6-foot hero and tap beer at a meeting that I'm never going to go to. I'm never going to. Now, some guys were smart, would join these organizations and use it to network. And those were the guys that got to the choice assignments and
Yeah,
got tit
yeah.
details and stuff. But like, I had no interest in doing that. So you must have been I'm sure the Hispanic Society landed on you trying to recruit you, and then when they found out you could play the bagpipes, the Irish were pulling at you.
Well, it was weird. The Hispanic Society and the Emerald Society the Irish still ran the job 86, 87,
Yeah,
big time. But you could almost smell that it was starting to turn. And I think the Hispanics are the largest ethnic group on the job now. I was
yeah, I
reading
would
that
think.
somewhere. But yeah, I think, at least in terms of the Emerald Society, they found out I played bagpipes, and some guys knew me before the job. They'd seen me around, and I get a phone call. I'm in the 4-0, and I think we had to do a year probation in that time. So I'm on my second half of my probation. I get a phone call, and it's a captain, Irish guy, plays the pipes. He played in the Emerald Pipe Band at the time, and he's like, "Is this Al?" And I said, "Yes, yes, yes, sir." I don't know what he's calling about. He goes, "My name is such and such. I'm in the Emerald Pipe Band." He goes, and I'll never forget these words he said because this is really classic, like Irish vernacular. He said, "Al, it would behoove you
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
to come down to the band practice." So it wasn't an ask. It wasn't a request. It was almost like a mafia, like terminology that, if you know what's good for you,
Or yeah.
you'll come down to band practice and this and that. So I did. And basically what they said was, listen, once you get it off probation, then come by on a regular basis. And, because being in the pipe band was a real lifestyle in those
Oh,
days.
yeah.
Let's just put it that way. We did a lot of traveling. Just a quick aside. I mean, when I was in the Emerald Pipe Band, I counted one year how many, we used to call them excusals I got, which basically was you were reassigned
Yeah.
to the pipe band for the day. So I think in those days you had to do something like 230 tours of duty as a patrolman. I counted 125 of those 230. I was reassigned to the pipe band, and they would send us everywhere. I mean, if somebody had a barbecue that had, the ability to call downtown and get us sent there, we were sent there. And I felt bad. I had an Irish lieutenant, and I used to drink with him across the street in McSherry's from the 4-0. But we were friends, but we were so shorthanded. And then half the time, like my name would come over the teletype. The following, is reassigned from the tour of duty in the 4-0. And he was like, I remember one day at the bar, he's like holding his head, just, how am I going to field the tour tomorrow? I said, "Well, I'm sorry." I empathize, because we just had no resources in the 4-0. We got the shittiest banged up cars.
Yeah.
Okay. When every other command, was done with them, fleet services would send them to the 4-0, but we were a tight brotherhood because we knew the department didn't care about us really.
You know,
All we had.
I was being a South Bronx cop, and I worked in Bronx Task Force, and then I was in auto larceny. So I collared in basically in every Bronx precinct. And I always liked the 4. The 4.0, the cops were great, very humble, and I like the 4.4 and I like the 4.6. I like those guys
Yeah.
too. But there
Yes.
were guys in the 4.4, 4.6 that had that mentality. Some like, well, we work in the 4.4 and you don't. You know what I mean? Like they'd look at your collar
Yeah.
brass and kind of give you a look. Listen, I like the
You're
guys
right.
4.6, especially the
Absolutely
4.6.
right.
But what got me about the 4, now I worked in the 4.2 right next door to your command, and I couldn't believe the amount of old timers, guys in their 50s and in the early 60s that were still on patrol and
Yeah.
still had foot posts. And we were
Yes.
talking about this the other day. I used to see that old black guy, Sanders, I think his name is.
Yeah.
That
Joey
guy was
Sanders.
on patrol
Yeah.
with his gun cross draw, like
Yeah.
a Mississippi gambler. And I was like, like one time we were on a detail on NSU. I'm like, who the fuck is it? Like, I couldn't believe A, that cop was that old, and B, was carrying his gun cross draw. And then we were talking about that guy, Rainey. He was even
Yeah.
older. Like that
Vic
guy,
Raines.
Reigns, that's it,
Raines.
Nick Reigns. What was it with those guys that they survived and were
Yeah.
able to be out like on the weather like a mailbox on those posts into their 50s and 60s?
All of them aged out. I think 63, is it? 63.
Mhm.
They basically were told, you're out the door. A lot of them had some steady posts, summonses. These guys would work a day tour. They'd be done by 11 a.m. So, they'd come back to the locker room, have lunch, sort their summonses out. They were like machines. I think they had to write a book a day, which was easy to do up on 149th Street. I mean, I always pretty much let people double park, but when they triple parked,
Yeah, it's enough.
it was like, "You passed my limit now," and they would complain when they would triple park getting a summons, but those guys could whack out a book in about 3 hours or so, and they loved it. Nobody bothered them really, very rarely did they ever have to call for an 85. I don't ever remember that happening, but they were there, and then they'd be back in the station house. Listen, those guys would have stayed
Yeah.
until their legs gave out, and I remember them very, very well. I don't know if that was the same in every command, but yeah, in the 4-0.
The 4.2 had a couple. The 4.2 precinct had a handful of guys like that, but the 4.0 had a squadron of guys in their late 50s, early 60s, and a
Yeah,
lot of them were around the hub. Now, the hub, for those of you who
yeah,
don't know, it's a business district in the 4.0. It's at 149 and 3. All these streets converge. There's several subway lines underground, a lot of buses. It's a shopping district. But the place was like, I had a foot post there a couple of times in NSU, and it was like being in Bangladesh. There were Methadonians nodding out all over the place, people running out of stores stealing shit. When you had a foot post there, especially as a rookie, you didn't get a moment's peace. Like you needed Indiana Jones's whip to keep people away from you because there was just so much shit going on over there. How long did it take you to figure it out, like, as a cop to say, all right, I'm going to ignore this one, kick this one in the ass and tell them to
Well,
get the hell out of here?
that's what we were saying, the art of policing. I mean, what good are you if 10 minutes into your getting to your post, you're off the street with a collar back in
Right.
the precinct. So the most effective kind of cop in that situation is one that can differentiate, understand shades of gray and what really necessitates a collar and what merely can be handled by, number one, presence. Okay. And number two, and I'm big on this because I was down in Midtown last week and I saw just so many cops, fat pot bellies, out of shape, uniform looking god awful, knit caps, scraggly beards, unshaven, on their cell phones, huddled up 4 and 5 in a group. I mean, that doesn't go with me. I don't care what year it is or call me an old timer or whatever. A lot of what you could be effective at in say 49th and 3rd back in those days was your presence and looking good because
Yeah.
people will think twice about taking you on if you like you're in decent shape. Problem now is a lot of cops getting assaulted. People says, I could take that guy. I could take him with one hand. And so they do. Back in our day, you fight a cop, you'll go into the ER before you went to central booking. And people knew that. How many times I saw guys up in central booking, okay, with the white gauze around their head and with bloody on one side and going through
Rock
central
party hat.
booking. That was the Bronx. I know it's not that way anymore, and there's good reasons why there's not. But there's no reason for some of the cops, and I hate to, to be hard on our colleagues, but there's no reason for some of these guys to be so out of shape at a young age. I mean, some of these guys are in their 20s and they're carrying 275, 280 pounds. Who are they going to chase? Who are they going to help?
Well, they're not.
It's very disappointing because I feel like we chose an honorable profession. We didn't make a lot of money for what we did, but our hearts were in it. Yeah. I always try to look my best, because that was a win-win for good policing. If you didn't have to put your hands on somebody, you could just stop all that just by getting out of the car in your uniform, looking decent, and you're like that guy that's looking to cause some trouble says, "You know what? Not today." That's a win-win.
Absolutely. And the 40 was known as a heavy duty heroin precinct.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you remember 138 in Brook. Can you
God.
describe what went on in one?
So we got to go full Bronx here. We don't call it heroin. It's heron.
Heron.
Heron. Okay. So 139 in Brook, there was a burned out tenement building. Basically, everybody was scoring there. We used to see sanitation workers pulling up and copping there. Unfortunately, and I never understood this, we had an ICO. I won't name his name, but he would come to roll call and say, if I see any uniformed cop bringing in a drug arrest, he's going to have to answer to me. And we were all scratching our heads. I said, what kind of nonsense is this? And where is he getting the arrogance to say that to sworn law enforcement and feel like he has the authority to say that? Somebody must be telling him to say that. And that was under Dinkins. And when Giuliani came in, though, that ICA was gone. Okay. And next thing you know, it was, hey, guys, you can do it, watch the corruption hazards, but, there's no longer that kind of scrutiny in terms of doing your job. But 139 in Brook, 139 in Brook was just an all-out crack house. Anything went.
You could have a couple of hundred people out there. It was like Grand Central Station 24/7. And the closest thing I ever saw to that was when I worked in narcotics 110 in Lex, where on 4 corners, there was 20 people working on each corner. And just the cars were rolling up and people jumping out and then people ripping off the drug dealers and someone taking it. There's always a guy with a gun protecting the spot. I'll take a shot at that guy. It was anarchy up there.
They used to booby trap inside. They would get just like a scrap piece of wood, and then they would put nails through it. And then they would place it in such a way that if the cops came in, those nails were going to go through your shoe or your boot. And, those things had rust all over them.
Ugh.
Yeah, there were some real evil people. It wasn't just a bunch of people getting high. It was people that were out to hurt cops.
And then the 40 also had that mega methadone clinic.
148.
Didn't you tell me they used to have a 2-for-1 sale on methadone on the weekend?
On Saturdays. The place was, these people get methadone every day, but the place was closed on Sundays. So on Saturday, they'd give them 2 doses, okay? They come in the little bottles, and they have to drink the one, at the place, and then they allowed them to leave the place with the extra one. Well, they would just go and sell that stuff. Right. And there'd be people from Jersey there, Connecticut, Pennsylvania driving in because they know they can get that stuff. In addition to that stuff, they buy more heroin or crack or whatever it was to enhance it. I mean, there's just some people that love getting high. We have to face facts. I mean, nobody wants to say it. There's people that like nothing else in life but getting high. That's why they're in their condition. And if you say that, there are people who say, well, you're unsympathetic. Or listen, I worked there. I used to talk to these. They would tell you, officer, I just like for getting high. Don't judge me. And I'm like, I don't judge you, but thanks for telling me the truth.
The 40 was a smaller precinct, but it was heavily populated because of all the housing projects and the tenements there. There were a lot of drug-related murders in the 40.
Yeah, cowboys. Well, the 40 has the highest concentration of housing projects of any precinct in the city. And, well, they would assign like 2 cars in housing. And I remember one time they had to call a summit meeting because 40 guys were ready to go hand-to-hand combat and start throwing hands on some of the housing cops. And St. Jerome's Church across the street from the 40, we had a big meeting. It was unofficial, but they had the housing delegate and our delegates and the Bronx, borough delegate in there. Uh, guys were going at it. And one of the things I said, I understand housing's shorthanded. We're shorthanded, but I asked a question, and this is what caused a ruckus. I said, "How come the housing never has to go 63 over the air like we do? Like we can get denied going to meal. Housing never. They go 63 from the PSA. They call Central and say, I'm on meal, and they never get denied meal. In addition, they never get sent to details, but that's another story. But I raised that question. You know what happened when I raised that question? Everybody started going nuts because it was true. And then I remember the housing delegate and the Bronx borough delegate, it was John Young and Hank Sullivan. They did the old Irish maneuver, pulling me into another room away from everybody. I knew what was going on. I said, listen, guys, don't try to shit with me. Answer the question. Well, housing is a quasi-federal city agency, and they operate under different rules. I said, yeah, but all us 4 guys, we're getting denied meal every day to handle housing jobs. Somebody needs, to bring this up. Listen, we were all brothers. The housing guys, the 4, we're all brothers. But it became a thing, like, as you turned out from roll call, you had like 3, 4 jobs in housing already stacked up that you were assigned to. And like, we're the housing guys. Oh, like they didn't even go on tour yet. How could they already be not available? So
Yeah.
these are the things that went on.
You bring up John Young. He reminds me of that actor that always was in Clint Eastwood movies, Pat Hingle. And he always had that cigar. He'd always have that cigar.
Yes.
He would show up on shootings and shit. Like he was like cast right out of a freaking movie. All right, you're not talking to nobody. Get over here. And then the other guy was Lang, who was a little more polished.
Lang.
I had a great relationship with the guys in PSA 7.
Yeah,
and there was
so did we.
really good in the early 90s and late 80s. There were really, really good cops in PSA 7. But you're right, because it would be, and I'm going to get beat up by the housing guys. Be like, there's a domestic on, whatever on Webster, 9296, 9296, 40 David. Can you respond? Then all of a sudden it'd be a gun run 5 minutes later, 9296, 9754, and then all of a sudden like, they just popped up the whole time. But I like housing. I've always had a good relationship with them.
Nothing personally.
Yeah,
I guess we had 4 cops that got made sergeant, went to PSA 7, and the whole thing. We all drank together. We just didn't understand how housing operated under different rules because of this sort of quasi-federal status, and how they were assigned fell under sort of like a different set of rules. Because to us, we were all just cops, whether you're housing, transit, 4 whatever. Like, the tour just started and already 2 housing cars are out. Like, how could it be? How could it be?
And yeah, the 4 also had a lot of dump jobs, as I remember, because you guys had the underbelly of the Bruckner, so someone could just dump a body out on the midnight. And the 4 also had a lot of vacant lots, especially, I don't know what sector it is in the 4 but where they had the famous tugboat strike down there, and it's like it's the middle of nowhere. It's like a toxic waste dump down there with all these old abandoned factories. After 5 o'clock at night, there's nobody down there. But in that sector, there was a little German restaurant that you would never know in a million years that was down there. Can you go into what tell us about the Schlitz Inn?
First day working in the 4 the day tour. Okay, so after that, scenario I was telling you about, Puerto Rican cops and the Irish cops looking at me, side eye. I got taken off a foot post, and I got 10-2, and they said, you're going to jump in the car. I'll just say his name was Richie. He was about a 6'4" African-American guy. He was like a Southern gentleman. Like he would stroll into roll call when it was half over. We had like a set of double doors. He just like pushed the double doors, like bang, and he'd stride in like a Southern gentleman. And he wore the gun belt with the rounds on the gun belt. Yeah, like a gunslinger. And he'd just walk in like he didn't care. There was no sergeant that could tell him anything. It was just like, he's here. That's all that mattered. So anyway, They 10-2'd me. They said, "You're gonna ride with Richie today." And I get in the car, and he's like, "How you doing, kid?" I said, "Oh, nice, nice." What? He goes, "I'm Rich." He goes, "Listen, here's how it's gonna go. I'm gonna drive for the first half, and then you'll drive for the second half." And I said, "Okay." Well, on mealtime comes, he pulls down to the Schlitz Inn. Now you gotta understand, this is like a German American bar, great food, but a full bar with some tables. It was more a bar than anything else. And this poster behind me, Fort Apache, the Bronx, they filmed the interior bar scenes in there. If you look at the movie when Paul Newman and the guys are out there having a few drinks. Anyway, we pull in around noontime. Now Richie there's no parking. Richie just pulls the R&P like right on the sidewalk in front of the door. Right there. It's like, "We're here." I'm like, "What? We're here for what?" He's like, "Me." Right? Okay. We walk in there. There's about 100 people in there. Sanitation workers, Con Ed, transit workers, guys that worked in Sabrettes, all the industrial factories when they're having lunch and cocktail and the whole thing like this. And so I'm following Richie, goes down to the very end of the bar, and they had a bartender. I remember his name was Tommy. And Richie just like takes place at the end of the bar. And Tommy comes over with a bottle of wild turkey and 2 shot glasses, slams it down. And Richie this is my first day in the forum. Was 2 shots of wild turkey. And he goes, "Here you go. Nice to meet you." Right. And I'm like shitting bricks. I'm like, what the fuck is this? You know? I mean, I like a shot. Don't get me wrong. I was like, no, 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 I'm good, Richie. He goes, "All right, more for me then, you know." He proceeds to have like 3, 4, maybe 5 shots. He hands me the keys. He says, "Okay, we're going back to the station house now, 63. All right. Down in the 4-row, like we didn't even have tables or anything. They took like the seats out of an old crashed up van and put them in, like you sat on them, you rock back, you're afraid you're gonna fall over or anything. That's all we had, and a TV. Well, Richie goes to sleep. Now, meal hour's over. On the radio, Central's calling us, this, and I'm trying to wake Richie up. I'm like, "Richie, we gotta go, we gotta go." And I was like, all I could do to get him up, we stagger out to the car. We get to the job. He's like this. So I remember some woman says, "Is he all right?" I said, "Oh no, he's not feeling good today. He's got the flu." I just said anything, and people are looking at it. But that was like some of the old time cops were like that. Drinking was part of the job in those days. But I mean, he was the extreme. But I remember when he retired, I heard he passed away not even 6 months later. He moved down to Carolina or something, and I wasn't surprised.
Well, you guys had 2 famous bars in the 4-0. You had Star Wars.
Right across from the 4-0, McSherry's.
Tell
We
tell
called it
can you explain why the cops call the bar Star Wars?
'cause you had all they used to call them the neighborhood creatures, like, this cast of characters that would come in there from the neighborhood, and it was incredible because here we were, a lot of us were just cops, we were all bachelors in those days. None of us had anything to go home to, so if you were working a day tour, staying there till about 8 at night was pretty normal. I lived over in Astoria in Queens in those days, so yeah, 4 or 5 hours drinking in there. We used to wait till Jeopardy come on, and then when Jeopardy came on, the bartender, we call him Dirty Dick, he would take a few dollars off each one of us and give us a pencil and a napkin, and we see who got the final Jeopardy right. But the neighborhood people that would come in was just amazing. You'd sit there and just watch them, whatever their shtick was. We had this one, she was about an 80-pound black woman. We called her Cupcakes. And all she come in, she'd just start going off about my SSI and all, all this, like her stuff, a check, this and that. And she'd say, "Can I get $5? I'll do anything." We're sitting there like, we were like, "Please." And she's like, "I'll take my clothes off right in the bar. Just give me $5." So some of us, we got a few drinks and we gave her $5 and we said, "Go across the street to the precinct." Now you got to understand, McSherry's, we could see right out the window into the lobby in front of the desk, right? We gave her some money. I could tell this story because it's 25, 30 years ago. And she went in front of the desk. Now you got to understand, in the lobby of the 4-0, there's all people waiting to make 61s and, this and that. Well, she proceeded to, like, strip naked in front of the desk with a lobby full of people running out the door, and we're sitting in McSherry's and laughing our asses off. I mean, it was just crazy stuff like that, and, the desk sergeant knew we sent her
Of
in.
course.
It was a luxury. It was a place we had because there really wasn't any place in the 4 to drink except that. It was sort of our place, but it was also the neighborhood's place. Like,
Yeah.
somebody from the neighborhood came in with a few dollars and ordered a drink. They got served like anybody else. Their money was just as good.
I was in Star Wars a couple of times. Working in the 4-2 after midnight, sometimes we wound up in Glackens. That was another place that
The
technically never
4-4.
really closed.
That was a corrections hangout.
Yeah.
They were on the other side of 149th Street, which was the 4-4, and, the other side was the 4-0, and they would quadruple park over there. I mean, that was like,
I remember.
but the drinks were like this.
Yep.
They came in these big, tall things. Now, you imagine if you ordered a vodka orange juice or something, you're basically getting like 3/4 vodka, topping it with OJ. You get hammered in there.
Yeah.
I never really drank in there because I was like, after one drink, I'm like, how am I gonna drive home? You know? And listen, guys took DWIs.
Yeah.
They got in accidents. But it was a different time.
Yeah.
Listen, I remember some of our guys, get into fender benders and, you tried to help them as much as you could. It was a different time. We took keys off people in those days,
Well, yeah,
you
unless you
know?
were in a DUI unit, the NYPD really wasn't enforcing DUI laws on anyone. There was just too much going on.
Yeah, and it wasn't just cops we would help. If somebody was from the neighborhood and decent people, see,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
you say, "Listen, I'm gonna put your keys in an envelope. You can't come back today. Come back tomorrow and you get your keys, but, take this as a lesson. Thank God you didn't hit anybody, stuff like that, but you can't do it now." And I understand it, believe me. I understand why you can't do it. There's too much of that stuff out there, and we've all done it. Listen, I'm the first one to say, and I say this in my play. In my play, I do not try to make myself look like, I'm some squeaky clean Superman guy. I talk
No.
about in my show the times I could have done better, the times where maybe, had I a chance to do that all over again, I would have chose a different path. Times I faced temptation, times, I think to myself that I'm glad, I've taught my son differently. So that's kind of the essence of my show is just like, you and anybody that was on the job watching this, my show touches on our humanity, our frailty, our temptation, our regret, our failure. And we all had that in our careers. All of us, if we're honest.
Definitely. Earlier, I brought up some of the colorful characters that worked in the 4-0, and a couple of names come to mind. Flash Gordon, who was a legend in the 4-0. I really got a kick out of that guy. He was one of those guys. I think he was on patrol till the very end, right?
Pretty much. Steve
Yeah.
Stasiak, real good guy.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm most proud of? His son is a boss in the Secret Service.
Oh, good.
The uniform end of it. And I remember Flash used to bring little Steve when he was 8, 9 years old into the precinct, and you just knew he was gonna go into some type of law enforcement. He would just sit there like a sponge and absorb it all, and guys would bring prisoners in, and the prisoners were screaming and all this. He saw all that at a young age, and you almost felt like you wanted to protect him, but on the other hand, he saw the job and what it really is, and he wasn't traumatized by it. He wound up going into that profession, so I'm
Where
very
did
proud
Flash
for that
Gordon
young
get
man.
his nickname from? I'm sorry. Where did Flash Gordon get his nickname from?
Yeah, good question. That predates my time in the 4-0 because, when I got to the 4-0, he introduced himself to me. I'm Flash,
Yeah, that's the same thing.
Everybody had a nickname. It almost seemed like, we had one black cop. I won't mention his last name, but Charlie was his name, and everybody called him Preach or the Preacher because when the prisoners was in the cell, he'd go over to him, start quoting scripture to them and telling them they got to cast Satan out of them and wickedness and all this stuff. He was serious, and some of the prisoners would be like, "Oh, get that guy away from me." I don't wanna hear it, you know? I know I'm a collar, but I don't have to hear
Right.
this Bible stuff. Preach.
Another famous character from the 4-0, and Bronx guys will remember him because he was a 4-4 cop. Then he was a sergeant in the 4-0, then later a lieutenant in the 4-7. Crazy Joe.
Yeah, Joe Blank. Joe Blank.
What a legend.
Yeah, I have Joe Blank stories, none of which I'll tell here or in my show,
Right.
but I will tell you this. Joe Blank, sometimes he would grab me for his driver because we got along good and we always would have a drink at McSherry's afterwards and stuff. So he'd say, "Al, you gonna drive me today? You don't mind, right?" I say, "No." We'd be driving down the street, like by the projects, and black women would yell at the R&P, "Joe, Crazy Joe, is that you?" They loved the man. They come over to his side of the car and start hugging on him and kissing him, and, they just loved the man. There was something about him that he had this sort of charisma with, the black community, and I remember they went to bat for him on some occasions. I think it was up in the
4-4.
4-4. Yeah, and it was an amazing demonstration of how, you didn't see that back in those days, the community getting, behind the cops, and especially in a 4-4. But I do know that he was just quite, not only quite the character, but there was something about him that translated that black people appreciated. Because he was always good, we went on calls and stuff like that, right away he had an immediate rapport with people, he didn't come across as heavy-handed, he always had, like, a smile on his face,
Yeah.
and he told you and he had one eye kinda went, like, a little bit this way, one eye went a little bit that way, so right away, you're, like, looking at him like, "Okay, what's going on here?" But I love the guy. The last I heard, he was still alive, and he might be in Florida, but I can't swear to that. He did come to a few of our reunions, I know that, I remember seeing him.
I started hearing stories about him when I was in field training because my sergeant was a 4-4 guy. And I remember
Okay.
one time we were driving around the 4-4 and he said, all is quiet. And he brought up, Crazy Joe Blank. And I said, and he was just telling me these stories about the guy, about how they told him to clean up the neighborhood. He would come in painter's clothes and hide in dumpsters and jump out at people and all this crazy. And I couldn't believe it. And then you meet him and you're like, that's very quite possible. Everything I heard is true. And I'll tell you a Joe Blank story. I was in auto larceny, probably about 94, 95, and we're up in the 5250 border. And my father had the same kind of car. It was like a 94 reddish Dodge Shadow. And I saw a car go by with a bunch of teenagers in it. And I ran the plate and it came back to Joe Blank. And I'm not going to say from where. And I go, I bet you got his car stolen. So we swung in behind this car, pulled a teenager, and it was his son. His son's last name and everything. I says, your father's somewhat of a legend around these parts. He goes, I've heard that. He goes, I've never gotten pulled over for it. All right, tell your old man we said hi. We just kind of sent this kid on his way.
Yeah, there is something about our job that is unique because no matter what profession you work with, you'll have stories. But in our profession, some of the characters that you meet, these these cops, they could have been comedy writers like for Johnny Carson or,
Absolutely.
any sort of thing like that. The humor and the sort of what's the right word? I won't say deviousness, but the mischievousness, okay, in a good way that came out of them, it just sticks with you. That's why I had absolutely 0 problem writing this book and writing this play because my problem is what to cut out. When I started doing it, I got this big sort of board with index cards and I started writing little synopsises of stories. I had to cut 3/4 of them because it wouldn't fit into an hour and 15-minute show.
Write a second book and a second play.
Yeah, it could be a sequel. I will tell you a story that gives me night sweats to this day. We had a 4-0 cop who I thought was the best street cop I had ever seen. I'll just say his first name was Vic. He wound up getting locked up by the feds because he was involved with the Dominican cowboy gang who were doing murders up in the 3-4 and in the South Bronx. Anyway, I had worked with Vic on and off in a radio car, and I lived in Astoria, Queens. Vic gets locked up, and it was in the papers. I'm coming out of my apartment where I lived in Astoria, and I'm walking to my car. Who's walking towards me in the street as I'm going to the driver's side of my car? This guy, and he looks at me, and I said, "Vic." He looked at me, he hesitated for a second, and then he kept walking. To this day, I think he was there to kill me because this was an obscure block in Astoria. He didn't live there. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark. I said to myself, "Why is he walking past me as I'm getting in my car?" To this day, I can only think he didn't shoot me or kill me for some reason because I think he thought I might have been possibly being called in to testify anything I knew about him, which I didn't. My opinion up until that point was this guy can just like look at somebody on the street and know they have a gun or know they're dirty. And I was absolutely amazed at his like sixth sense. But he got locked up on a big federal case, and I just don't know why he was on my block at that time in the morning walking right at me.
Was this after he got arrested or before?
Yeah, after.
So he probably made bail and
Yep. You're probably looking who might be in the position to, be called in to testify. Not that I knew anything, but did he know that I didn't know anything? To this day, I've run it past several guys whose opinions I respect, and they all kind of said to me, "Yeah, Al, he found out where you lived. He's probably sitting there
laying on you.
for laying on you, so let me come out," and then just didn't go through with it.
It probably saved your life that you made eye contact with him and gave him enough time to not pull that trigger.
Yeah, he didn't walk behind me, yeah, and just,
You probably he was probably as startled that you recognized him and made him at 6 o'clock in the morning. Probably figured you'd have your head down, you put 2
yeah.
in you and just keep
Yeah,
walking.
yeah, yeah. That's the one thing from the job that I still think about. I'm fortunate that I'm able to compartmentalize. I never really. My wife will tell you this. But I never really lost sleep or things like that from stuff that happened. During my career, but that one always comes back at me. And a couple buddies of mine, they worked OCCB, they worked different things. And when I told them that, they said, "Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. I think he was there to hit you."
Well, on a lighter note,
Yeah.
we both worked in the Bronx in the mid '80s. Each borough has shoe flies. There's 2 guys, they're
Yeah.
captains, and they float around the borough and they nitpick cops for not wearing their hat or giving jobs back too early and not putting themselves out a meal. One shoe fly, I'm not going to say their name, sold cheesecakes in his spare time and always had a shit-eating grin.
We know who he is.
Pull
Yeah.
up on you in the pumps, and he was just a weird dude. The other one,
Yeah.
I think, always had a cigar. His story was as before he was a captain, the second guy, supposedly he worked in the 4-1 as the ICO. The story I heard, he was busting their balls all the time. Someone called the Secret Service up and said, "Hi, my name is Lieutenant Smith, and I work in the 4-1 precinct, and I don't much like Ronald Reagan's politics. And when he comes to New York, I'm going to shoot him with my service revolver." Well, the Secret Service, of course, acts on this, grabs him. He denies it. The job gets involved. Obviously, they knew he didn't do it, but still, why take the chance? So the story was every time the president came to town, he got assigned to one police plaza and they took his guns from him because just to make sure. But
Why take a chance?
why take a chance? Like in a mob, good guy, why take a chance? But our mutual friend Justin, who's put us together, told me
Yeah.
another story about this shoe fly captain. He was retired many years, and he was attending a racket at the Marina Del Rey, a wedding or something.
Yeah. 4
And
5, yeah.
afterwards, he's walking down Schurz Avenue to get into his car, and there's a bunch of cops, retired cops, barbecuing in one of those yards there, and they'll lick it up and they go, is that him? Can it be him?" And the cops are hanging on the fence. "You old son of a bitch. Why are you still alive? Just motherfucker," and him and stuff. And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, okay, very nice." Still
Yeah, yeah,
smoking the
yeah.
cigar, got into his car and just drove away.
We talk about, all the characters and humorous stories and stuff. I was just thinking the other day, I remember, this has gotta be around, 19 somewhere around there. It's, we we were tight-knit bunch of guys, we're in the 4-0. We're like, really, the only way out of here is getting promoted. But guys would have such a sense of humor about stuff,
Oh
and it
God.
it bordered on the absurd. I remember on our radio cars, and just to demonstrate how divorced the 4-0 and precincts like that were from the department, you know what I mean? Like, they just totally neglected the precinct. For about a year, somebody had put, David Duke for president bumper stickers. Do you remember David Duke?
Yes.
David Duke for president bumper stickers on all the chrome bumpers of the old Grand Fury
I
radio
remember.
cars.
I saw it.
And those stickers were there for years until they were there, like, until that RMP got totaled or, taken out of service finally, like, falling apart. And I was saying to
Oh
myself,
my
could you
God.
imagine if that was, like, in Midtown South or, the 17th, that bumper sticker would have been on that car for about 2 minutes and 47 seconds before it became like a major, like, front page story in the Daily News, but it was the 4-0. Nobody gave a shit. All they cared about was, are the jobs getting handled, okay? Just handle, don't go into backlog and everything, but yet the RMP's got these stickers on,
And
and
no one blinked.
no, it was like,
I remember seeing
whatever,
that.
anything goes.
That's a memory I haven't thought of in close to 40 years. Oh my God. I remember that. Those bumper stickers. I'm like, that takes balls to slap. The guy was
Oh, yeah.
running for the head of the Ku Klux Klan or something. Oh my God.
For it was not, whoever did it wasn't serious that
No, of course
he
not.
was voting for David Duke, but it was the absolute absurdity
Absurdity.
and the absolute balls to do that and know that nobody was ever gonna, like, do an investigation on it. Like, if that had been Midtown, they would have had, like, prints being taken
Oh
and,
yeah.
like, calling people in and geo-15ing.
I you
Nobody
would see
cared.
you would see shit in South Bronx precincts that you would never see somewhere else. I remember like cops. I saw this in the 4-4 for the first time, and I thought it was the craziest thing. The Grand Furies on the hood of the Grand Furies, there were little vents, and there were
Yeah,
2 little jets that came out to spray the windshield with windshield wiper fluid. So the cops would do is they would pull them out a little bit with a set of vice grips or needle nose and then twist them sideways. So then they would squirt the perps in the back. So you see an RP at a light and there'd be a bunch of skells and you see the cop hitting it and the windshield wipers going and the fluid is just spraying the
yeah.
shit out of the and then they would just drive off. And I just saw that. I go, someone has a lot of time on their hands. It's just
Oh, yeah.
ingenious.
Guys are ingenious. Like I said, all the time in the 4-0, yeah. Would I have welcomed, a transfer, like, in my later years, say, to the 3-4, make the commute a little bit easier? But when I look back on it, I wouldn't have these stories. I wouldn't have
No.
my show. I wouldn't have the book that I'm writing. I wouldn't have all these memories, and I'm very proud that I worked there. Like you were saying before, sometimes cops, they look at your collar brass and they start making,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
judgments. Just the way we're competitive. But I loved working in the radio car. It was something that was in my blood. I didn't know it at the time. But I remember, different precinct COs would say to me, "Hey, Al, you want to get out of that radio car? Or do you want to, maybe I could make a phone call for you?" And basically, I would say, "I'm good. Thank you for asking." When the day comes, I looking for a change. I'll come knock on your door. And eventually, one of my COs came to me and said, "Al, I heard that they're picking up guys down in Intel. Are you interested in throwing your name in the hat?" And I really didn't know what it was. He goes, "Just trust me on this one. Let me make a phone call for you." And then I got called for an interview, and then, I got picked up. I really didn't know what the job was. When I went there, it was basically doing, you were like an intelligence analyst sitting at a keyboard and everything like that. I didn't stay there long. It wasn't what I was cut out to do. And they were doing some illegal stuff. I'll leave it at that. They got sued. They had to pay a big settlement out to the ACLU for some of the, let's put it this way, searches they were doing on people, Fourth Amendment violations and everything like that. And I finished out at the 4 I went back. I was happy to go back, that's where I retired out of.
If you could go back in time, Al, would you do it all over again?
Hell yeah. I mean, I don't even have to think about it. I mean, I don't think I could do the job,
Right.
physically, trudging up 6, 7 tenement flights, and one thing you learn being a South Bronx cop, the calls always come from the top floor. Never the ground floor. It's always the top floor. Somebody should do a thesis for their PhD on it, analyze how many calls come from the top floor, because there's a sociological element to it, because the apartments with the highest turnovers are always on the top floor rather than the more stable people on the ground floor. So yeah, that's my theory anyway. I can't prove it, but that's my theory, is that the more unstable the people, and what I say by unstable is they call the police for everything.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I remember, I'm sure you remember, and cops that are watching the show, people in the South Bronx, I can only speak for that, call 911 for everything. From the time they're little children, they see the parents calling 911, and all through into adulthood, they call 911 because we're Big Blue. We have to show up. We can't just refuse not to go. You have to give a disposition back. So when every other city agency fails them, okay, they call 911 just to get you there. They just want to vent. I remember getting calls, the toilet don't work, or the sink is broke, or the boiler's out. Like, there's no heat in the building. Yeah, I feel bad for the people. What am I going to do? Start like working on the boiler with a toolkit and plumbers around? I can't do that. But they call 911 because we're the agency of last resort. The Department of Buildings fails them. When the housing authority fails them, they call 911 just to have somebody to commiserate
Yeah.
with. And I get that, and I talk about that in my play. You're going to get called to all kinds of things, and people that grow up with that mentality, they saw their parents call the cops for everything. They're going to do exactly the same.
Al, please tell our listeners the name of your play and when it's going to be available.
It is titled "Officer: Confessions of a South Bronx Cop." And it will be playing in New York City and some of the suburbs in April. I have a website. It's www.officertheplay. That's all one word, officertheplay.com. If you were on the job, no matter where, it doesn't have to be the South Bronx, I think you'll enjoy it because it tells the stories from the point of view as if you were sitting in the radio car with me, and the audience sees it just as my eyes see it. And it's the same stories that if all of us were sitting around having a drink, we would tell these stories to each other, but now I'm telling the stories to a theater audience.
Al Gonzalez, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for spending your time with us today.
I enjoyed it completely, Vic, and I'd like to say hello to all our colleagues who are retired now. I hope you're enjoying your retirement and keep collecting those checks.
As always, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Cape Town, West Cape. Oh, that's South Africa, Tampa, Florida, Knoxville, Tennessee, Columbus, Indiana, and Putnam Valley, New York. If you work in law enforcement or have an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you enjoy the content, check out my Amazon author page. Just type in my name, Vic, Ferrari like the car, where you can preview all my NYPD books for free. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you next week.